Welcome to the 10th episode of the podcast. This is your proprietor, Tony Ortega, coming to you from an undisclosed location deep inside the interior of the Earth's crust, otherwise known as the underground bunker. Recently, Scientology has been advertising a big advance they are referring to as a wider bridge, which was to be announced last week. Well, it turns out that it's just David Miscavige's way to get Scientologists excited that local orgs are dropping some COVID protocols and starting up things like the purification rundown. In other words, it's pure marketing and not really an advance at all, something that Mike Rinder made fun of in a great blog post this week. We wanted to talk to someone about Dave's latest marketing ploy, and who better than the best marketer Scientology ever had? The man who came up with the famous erupting volcano TV ad for Dianetics in the 1980s, Jefferson Hawkins. Jefferson, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. The
Always a
reason I
pleasure.
thought we've been talking for years, but the reason I thought about you this week was that we've been seeing some advertisements from Scientology talking about something they refer to as a wider bridge. And it was supposed to happen last week, and I know a lot of us were curious. And then Mike, at his blog, had a wonderful post about what it turned out to be. And when they were referring to a wider bridge, this was their marketing for letting people know that things are finally open. They can come to the local org. They don't have to wear a mask or gloves, and come on down and do your purif, basically.
Right, the Purif is
And
open.
Mike had, yeah, the purif is now open. I mean, because they kept, I guess they kept flag open throughout, as long as you went and quarantined for a while, and same with the free wins. But the local orgs, I guess, were not delivering some of those basic face-to-face things. And so now, they want to get people interested. So this is it's marketing. Come on in to see the wider bridge. And Mike had a great post poking fun at that and showing some of the overhyped, rhetoric. And I just thought, I wanted to get someone's perspective on that. And I thought, who knows Scientology marketing better than anyone? Jefferson Hawkins. So let's real quick just review why that is, and those of us that were around certainly remember your famous erupting volcano advertisement in the 80s that just boomed sales for Dianetics. But let's go ahead, and there may be some people that listening who aren't familiar with you. Why don't you do a quick background on how you first got into Scientology and how you ended up then being somebody that was so important in their marketing and advertising?
Okay, well, um, I was working in commercial art, graphic design, when I discovered Scientology in Los Angeles. This was at the end of 1967. And I went down to the org. It was on Ninth Street, and it was jam packed. I mean, hundreds of people in the lobby.
Wow.
And the intro lecture had at least 100 people. I think the lecture was given 2 times every evening, and every lecture was packed with like 100 people in the lecture room. And you just don't see that nowadays. But it was like the happening thing. And I just got swept up in it. I thought it was exciting, all the stuff about past lives. And, it was just kind of what I was looking for at the time was some sort of overwhelming spiritual subject.
Yeah, how old were you at that time?
I must have been 21, I think.
Okay.
Um, and so me and my brother and another friend, we packed up and went to St. Hill in England
Oh,
because
wow.
I wanted to join the publications organization. And they told me that the pubs org had moved up to Edinburgh. So we all got on the train and went up to Edinburgh and joined staff there. And I was in the pubs org for I don't know, maybe about 8 years, doing design and advertising stuff, designing book covers and books and just all kinds of things like that. And from pubs, I went to the ship, to the Apollo.
Wow.
And actually, Hubbard had asked for me to come. Uh, and he had sent a telex saying, send Hawkins to the ship. And he wanted to start a new marketing division on the ship. And so it was, and initially it was me and Ken Delderfield, and then other people joined it, David Ziff and a bunch of other people. And we were the first marketing unit. We were making all the flyers and things like that. And then I continued that when we moved to land base, I was in the dissemination area
In
and
Clearwater, Florida.
in Clearwater, and
Okay.
I was editing most of the magazines at that time. I did Advance Magazine, Source Magazine, and the Org Magazine shooting boards and all that stuff. And I was commended by Hubbard a couple of times for my Advance magazines.
And
Um,
Advance, and I have to say, Advance in that period, we're talking like early 70s or something.
yeah, yeah,
I have to say, as a connoisseur of Scientology publications, the absolute best vintage of Scientology magazines is Advance magazine from that period. It is such a pleasure to read this wonderful, strange, weird, but it did catch that sense of wonder, and every issue was diving into a different cultural, history of spirituality and stuff. And I could see how, particularly for young people in that period, this was exciting stuff, and definitely a very well put together magazine. Wonderful art, and I treasure my collection of those publications. I just wanted you to know that, Jefferson.
oh, thanks, thanks. Yeah, I had fun doing it, and that was when I still had a sort of a sense of wonder about the whole thing, about the OT levels and things like that. So I was really projecting my own sense of wonder. I hadn't done the OT levels when I was doing Advance Magazine.
So hang on. So you were putting together the OT phenomenon column, which people sent in basically their ghost stories about stuff they did with superpowers, their OT
Yep,
superpowers. You were assembling that column, not
yep,
having experienced any of those OT secrets yourself.
exactly, exactly.
That's great.
So I was as much in wonder as my readers were. I was
I
just
see. I see.
loving that, and making it artistic and making it aesthetic. Was just it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. And just for some of the maybe newcomers, Scientology is this increasingly expensive journey where you're trying to recover things that happened to you in your past lives millions and billions of years ago. And the promise being held out is that if you go through this expensive process and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, you will eventually reach what's called the OT levels, and you will literally gain superpowers. You'll be
Yes,
able
and immortality.
immortality and the ability to travel outside of your body and to affect things with your mind. And in order to kind of convince people to stay on the path, keep spending money, keep going through all this, was this wonderful column in Advance Magazine called OT Phenomena, where people would send in their stories about, well, I just completed OT5 and I heard my friend was having surgery and the next day over, so I left my body and went over there and made sure the surgery went well. I mean, I love these ghost stories that they would have in there. And the effect was it would keep people engaged, so I got to get to those levels myself. So that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about. And to this day, that magazine and the Source magazine is trying to convince Scientologists, keep going, come down to flag, spend the big money. I mean, they're still doing it today, but when you were doing it, it seems like there was more of a sense of wonder, and it seemed fun.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. It was a fun thing to do. I actually edited out the wilder ones. because
Crazy.
they were just insane, you know.
That's great. I didn't realize that. Because the ones that got in were kind of crazy, Jefferson.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have.
yeah. But you didn't. There was one that I received. This guy sat down in his easy chair and exteriorized and went to another planet and cleared that planet and then woke up in his easy chair. And I said, no, no, I'm not going to publish that one, you know.
So then, this is the '70s. Now, how did you get to the? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted your tale.
Well, um, it's a long story, which, you know, I tell in my book, in my
And let
memoir.
me and let me just say, Jefferson's book "Counterfeit Dreams" is one of the absolute best books written by former Scientologists describing their journey. I highly, highly recommend it. It not only was he there to witness all of these amazing things, but Jefferson is an excellent writer, and it will keep you. And you've written several other books too, helping people leave, which I think is great.
Yeah,
But
yeah, there was
you
one
must have
called,
counterfeit. You
yeah,
must
one
have
called
counterfeit dreams.
Leaving Scientology.
Right. But you must have counterfeit dreams on your a shelf if you are a Scientology watcher. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But, you know, but the basic story is I was really jonesing to do a big public campaign for Scientology. That
Hmm.
was what I wanted to do. And I was feeling frustrated at Flag because all we ever did was promotion to Scientologists.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, no, we're never going to grow by only doing that. We have to reach the raw public, as we called it, you know?
Right.
And, um, and I could see that it was not going to happen at Flag because everybody was stuck into the week by week statistics. And I knew that to launch a campaign, we would have to prepare it for 6 months or a year,
Right.
and nobody was going to authorize that because it didn't affect this week's stats, you say.
Yeah. Right.
So I then at one point I was called to Los Angeles because the the executive director international, who was Bill Franks at the time, um, they had just disbanded the Guardian's office, and part of that was GOPR, the PR bureau, and so they wanted to pick up the whole PR area, and they wanted to find a PR firm that they could hire that would handle the church's PR.
Okay, I see.
And so I went on a mission. I was sent on a mission to interview PR firms, and I was on that for I don't know a month or 6 weeks or something like that. And then it was like there was a big push to do a purification rundown campaign to raw public. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a whole TV special called "Get High on Yourself."
Oh wow. No.
Yeah, and it was God. It was a bunch of celebrities that were involved with it, including a bunch of Scientology celebrities were involved with this.
I do have a memory of writing about. I think I've seen some. Did this have like? Wasn't Muhammad Ali in this or something like that? Or
I
maybe
don't
I've got the.
recall him, but there was a bunch of people involved in it, a bunch of celebrities involved in it. Kathy Lee was involved in it,
Oh yes.
and a bunch of other people. And so we were supposed to do a purification rundown campaign that was going to follow up on this, so forth. And it was like a big flap, had to be done now, now, now. So we put together a campaign for the Purif, which wasn't bad. You know, it was, we figured out, uh, you know, the public to promote to and the buttons and the slogan. And, you know, we storyboarded out TV ads. We had the whole thing. And I presented this to three executives, three church executives at the time. Um, and they all just sat there like stone statues and they didn't react to it at all. And when I was finished, they all got up and left, and they said nothing to me. And I never heard another word about it. It was just dropped for some reason. And so I petitioned CMO Int uh, to be able to do a raw public campaign for Dianetics.
Right.
That was approved. And
I did find this thing, Jefferson. I wrote about it back in 2016, and I said before there was "We Are the World" and "Do They Know It's Christmas," there was "Get High on Yourself," a star-studded, if awful, song about saying no to drugs that made use of some of the biggest celebrities of the time. One of those celebrities was Muhammad Ali, who
huh,
was one of several athletes who appeared in the music video along with Bruce Jenner, Magic Johnson, and Dr. J. Other celebrities included TV stars Henry Winkler, Carol Burnett, and Hervé Villechaize, and a few film legends including Paul Newman and Bob Hope.
now I never heard about that, but that's amazing.
And putting it all together was legendary producer Robert Evans, who also appears in an extended clip on a television special made from the taping of the song. Um, and the main sort of Scientology celebrity helping was Kathy Lee Crosby at the time. I guess she was.
Yeah,
Anyway, I'm sorry. That's wild. So I'm sorry. Get back to your story.
yeah. So anyway, I was approved to do this campaign,
Okay.
and it was known that it would take 6 months to a year to get it rolling, which it did. We managed to get it rolling in 6 months, but we did extensive market research and surveys and on and on and on. It was, and that was the whole time period where I was learning how to get books into public bookstores because I had no idea, and nobody
Okay.
in the church had any idea how to do that.
Right.
So, and I hired a guy, Len Furman, who was a former vice president marketing for Simon and Schuster, and he was advising me through the whole thing, which was amazing, because he knew everything about the book business and he knew everybody in the book business. So he
That's
was
funny
able,
because I mean, when I was growing up in L.A., you know, of course, Walden Books was the big bookstore in every mall. I
yep,
remember Dianetics being on the shelves. But
yeah,
you're right. You can't find it on public shelves today.
nowhere, it's
You can
nowhere.
only get it at the org.
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah. And so we got it into Walden Books, we got it into B. Dalton Bookseller, and we got it into every paperback outlet, including like uh, just these little drugstores and stuff like that that carried paperback books. And Len knew how to do all of that because he had worked for Simon and Schuster. And meanwhile, the orgs were trying to just go in, send somebody from the org into their local bookstores, and that was creating a lot of friction and a lot of you know bad feelings about Scientology that
Oh, I see. Yeah.
these aggressive young people would come into the stores. And Len told me, he says, you can't just go into a local drugstore and pitch your book. He says, because the the people that put the books into all of those outlets, the paperback book outlets, he said, that's mafia.
Ha!
It was Teamsters. And he said, if they see a book in there that they haven't placed there, they'll throw them out. And so, we worked out how to go into the local truckers and buy them pizza and schmooze them so that they
Wow.
were like totally behind Dianetics.
I see. I see. Fascinating. And then, so then, how did your campaign then become this incredible TV commercial that people still remember today?
Um, well, we had gotten into I think we were up to 85 or 86, and I had a lady that was doing all of my media, Jan Gildersleeve, and she had worked for Ron Popeil, the infomercial king.
Oh yeah.
And she knew a lot about how to book media. And I had some ideas about it too, because I had done a lot of studies of different publics and different demographics. So I knew the audience that I was aiming for. And I could not get my media companies to buy that way. They just would not buy the media that I wanted. And
Uh huh.
so my the lady that was running my media, Jan, she came to me one day and she said, "There's this new thing called cable," and it was totally new. Nobody had
Uh-huh.
heard of it. And
Right.
she said people are not buying it because it's not rated by Nielsen. And I said, "Well, get me the demographics." And so she got me the demographics of the cable subscribers, and it exactly matched who I was trying to reach. And and it was cheap, and it was national, and we had never run a national campaign before.
Right.
So I said, "Okay, let's do it." And she said, "Do you want me to run a small pilot?" And I said, "This is how sure I was about it." I said, "No, put the whole budget into cable."
Wow.
And it was brand new, you know. And I had just finished making the question ads, with the with Jeff Levin's music, pop, 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 and all that. And I thought they were pretty strong, you know. So, and we had been running, I think, the John Brody ad, uh, John Brody promoting Dianetics, which had been our most successful ad.
Former San Francisco 49ers quarterback John
Yeah,
Brody. That.
yeah, John Brody. Yeah, I we filmed an ad with him up in Candlestick Park, and it did really well for a long time. And
Oh
then he
wow.
left Scientology, and we stopped running it. So I had the new question ads, which had never been run. I had cable, which we had never tried, and so I said, let's put the question ads onto cable TV and throw the whole budget behind it. And it was a pretty ballsy move.
Yeah.
But I said, let's just do it. And that's when the book sales just went up, 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 and across the ceiling. And, it was that kind of a thing.
And to remind people, what made the ad so unique was this narrator is just asking, like, what's the secret to a good marriage? Page 150.
Yeah,
How do I get ahead in my job? Page 85. And it just set up this idea that this, whatever this thing they're selling has the answers to everything.
yeah,
And then this erupting volcano animation comes on and says, Dianetics, get her at your local Walden Books, or whatever. And just that sense that there's this book down at your local bookstore that has all the answers to everything you're curious about was, and then there was a style to it. It was it Jeff Levin that did the music on that, or was
yeah,
it
yeah. Jeff Levin
very
did the music. Yeah,
very edgy, very futuristic, and very intense.
yeah.
It had a real intensity to it that made it just something that grabs your attention.
That
Uh,
was exactly what I was going for. I found a wonderful voice artist named um, Greg Burson, and he had this deep, deep voice, James Earl Jones type voice, which was just amazing. And he said, what kind of a voice do you want for this ad? And I said, I want God. I want the voice of God. And he did it. He did it.
Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. Buy your copy at B. Dalton's, Walden Books, or wherever paperbacks are sold. A fresh look at today's problems.
and the result was Dianetics had its best sales of all time, right? I mean, for several years.
Yeah, yeah. It went on all the bestseller lists within a month, I think. And it just kept going and going and going. And the orgs boomed during that period.
And I know there's John Atak and I disagree about a few things in regards to this, but I've checked with a lot of different executives, and I really believe that this era leading up to about 1990 was the greatest era of Scientology's extent. And I think around that time it reached about 100,000 active members around the world, and it's been
Yep,
shrinking ever since then. The Scientology has never had the millions that it claims, but
never.
around 1990, it had about 100,000 active people, and I would say largely it's due to that great marketing campaign that you had run for several years.
I think it had everything to do with it. You know, because it made it popular. It made it kind of edgy and interesting to be a Scientologist. You know.
And of course, David Miscavige, as the beneficiary of this and the guy running the organization with all these new members, he was thrilled that you had done such a good job, right?
No. David Miscavige, he hates anybody upstaging him in any way,
Right.
and he and so I did that campaign, and I was recognized at a couple of events and things like that, and he never forgave me for that. After that, he hated me. He did everything he could do to dismantle my unit and to stop the campaign, um, and which he managed to do. And by 1991, it was gone. That campaign had been stopped by him, by David Miscavige.
Wow.
And you can draw a line on any Scientology graph. Middle of 1991, June of 1991, draw a line there, and you will see that that's when the crash began.
And I would say that it's not just the fact that Miscavige never forgave you for such an effective campaign, and then that it ended around that time, but also right then, May 1991, is when the Time magazine story appeared on the cover of Time magazine,
Yep,
calling Scientology a global cult of greed.
yep,
And the combination of those two things, that epic Time magazine exposure and the lack of your campaign, I think began the long, steady decline of Scientology that
yep.
continues today.
And the stats were still falling when I left in 2005. They were still going down with an unbroken crash since 1991 to 2005. And I think that they have just continued down.
Right. And the last really high ranking executive to leave may be Paul Burkhardt, who left in 2013.
Mm,
He had daily access to international documents showing the size and health of Scientology. And several years ago, he estimated to me that he would put worldwide active membership of Scientology at around 20,000 or less.
yep, that's
Um,
about what I estimate. Yeah,
yeah, and that's before the pandemic.
yeah,
And they had fallen into this sort of program where, like you said, they were just marketing to Scientologists.
yep,
The one exception to that is their annual Super Bowl ad, which I think was largely motivated by the conflict with Debbie Cook at the time. But whatever they do, that's their one big outreach they do every year. Is they do a Super Bowl ad that gets widely mocked.
yeah,
But other than that, their marketing is all aimed at the Scientologists. A huge amount of effort spent on what's called recovery, and
hmm,
that's trying to pull back people who have left.
yep,
They spend a lot of time and resources on that, and then also trying to convince Scientologists to keep moving up the bridge, to go to Flag, to go to the free winds. Not much external, and
yeah.
then the pandemic hits, and they have to shut everything down. And I wondered how this might affect things. One thing that they tried to do is they first wanted to make sure that people were still engaged. So they started up this program Send us photos of yourself reading a Hubbard book at home.
Oh
Which,
boy.
on the one hand, they sort of the sort of language of it was just sort of like, "Hey, we're all in this together, and we're getting through this." But I also felt there was a little bit of an Orwellian thing, like, "Prove to us you're still
Yeah,
keep
we're
loyal
watching
to us."
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
And
the other thing is, you know, when I was in marketing, I had access to the mailing lists, and I knew exactly how many were on each mailing list.
oh, okay.
And that was, they had one list which was supposed to be everybody, and it was everybody who had ever, you know, bought a book and sent their name in, or had done a service or anything, Div 6 services, and that was 100,000.
And that's everybody that even just stepped in the door.
That's everybody, everybody. And we analyzed it at one time, and we estimated that about 40% of that list was what we called at the time offlines.
So not engaged, not doing
Yeah,
courses,
not
not
doing courses, not doing anything. I mean, that's the people that we call under the radar, which
right.
is the people that are pretending they're still in Scientology, but they don't do anything.
And just to point out to people that, you know, in Scientology, it's not enough just to call yourself a Scientologist or have great reverence for L. Ron Hubbard. You need to keep buying stuff. You need to keep going to courses. You need to keep, going up the bridge, buying books. And
Yep,
these are literal statistics that are kept. And so that's how people kind of prove that they're online, right?
yep, absolutely.
So anyway, so the other thing that happened in the pandemic was that they couldn't do the international events, Jefferson. And
Yes,
this
yes.
this is a big deal too. This is how they get the word out.
Yeah, and
So
that's how they make a lot of money, and that's how they release the new materials and all that is through these events.
so it just seemed to me like there was a lot of disruption to the normal ways that they get the word out. And something I told Leah on her podcast, I was explaining that one reason why I thought the pandemic was going to be especially bad for Scientology is that, I mean, Leah herself has talked about how even when she was filming um, King of Queens, and that was a daily filming, like 5 or 6 days a week, she was still going to the org every night.
Mm,
So she would film this TV series during the day, and then at night she'd go down to the Celebrity Center and work on her courses and her auditing and stuff.
I know, just amazing.
It is amazing. And I said, and so I've always felt that part of what the sort of control mechanism is how busy you're supposed to be all the time, right?
Yep. Oh
And
yeah.
then and then suddenly, pandemic, you're stuck at home. Yeah, send a picture to the church showing you're reading a book, but there's no reg, right? No registrar harassing you for donations. There's no person, sec checking you or going over your latest, no case supervisor. I'm just saying it just seemed like it would be difficult for Scientology because they couldn't intervene in people's lives the way they're used to.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And I thought that might allow some people to sort of look around, and that's dangerous for Scientology. Once people start reading other books not written by L. Ron Hubbard, or daring to look at the Underground Bunker or watch Leah's show, I
Yeah,
just felt like the pandemic had a lot of dangerous things for Scientology.
it does. And you know, I was having a conversation with Aaron Smith Levin, and about, and he said that there are Scientologists who watch his show,
Sure.
and I said, well, that's probably, you know, just the algorithm. If they have Scientology, the word Scientology is a part of their algorithm on Facebook or Google, then it's going to deliver up anything with the word Scientology in it.
Well, you were around when they tried the Net Nanny thing in like '98 or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Do you,
yeah, yeah.
do you remember that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, they were
because
trying to filter out all the N theta and stuff.
yeah, Scientology was very concerned about the internet, and they were Scientology was late to the internet. They didn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, Hubbard said that telephones were psychotic, right? So uh, Scientology did not want to have anything to do with the internet, and so they knew there was all this in theta, which is the opposite of theta, which is good, and theta is bad. All
Mhm.
this bad information about Scientology out on the internet, and that they didn't want people to see. And this was like 98 or something, so long before social media.
Mhm.
But they felt they could control it. So what they did was, and see if you agree if this is what you remember. They sent CD-ROMs to everyone, I think, encouraging them to get you should have a website, your own website on our URL or whatever. They had set up this space where you, as a good Scientologist, could create this little homepage that said, "I'm a Scientologist. My name is Joe. My wife's name is Nancy. We've been in Scientology for 10 years." And what they didn't tell them was that as they were creating this cute little homepage on the Scientology network, whatever, that it was installing software on their computer that would filter out any website that used keywords like Scientology or Xenu or all
Yeah.
that stuff. And
Yeah.
it was called the Net Nanny. Do you remember having to deal with that?
Hmm. I remember when that came out. You know, the problem with that is the problem that they have nowadays with disseminating, which is that any way you cut it, Scientologists are ashamed of being Scientologists.
Yeah,
And
good
so,
point.
are they going to put up a website that says, "Hi, I'm a Scientologist"? No, they're not. They don't want people to know. And, I always contrast that when I was getting into Scientology. It was like everybody was getting into Scientology. And I had a bumper sticker on my car, true story, that, that said, "Ask me about Scientology."
Wow.
And, it was kind of the hip thing to be, it was to be a Scientologist. And I would have people literally stop me and say, "Okay, what's it all about?" They wanted to know.
Wow.
But can you imagine any Scientologist today having a bumper sticker that said, "Ask me about Scientologists"? Wouldn't
No,
happen
no, you're
because they're
right.
ashamed of being Scientologists because Scientology is so, um, disliked and distrusted.
And to this day, they don't have the Net Nanny, but they're still trying. They have social media police, which is
Yeah.
that Scientologists. People are surprised when I tell them I see Scientologists doing certain things on Facebook, and they're like, "Well, I didn't think Scientologists could be online," and I think that's left over from the stories about the Net Nanny in the late '90s.
Yep.
No, Scientologists are definitely online today, and Scientology itself has definitely embraced the internet. However, Scientologists know that if they look at things online that they're not supposed to, they will get hauled in for an interrogation. It'll last weeks. It'll cost them thousands of dollars. So
Absolutely.
Scientologists are very good at policing themselves and keeping away from that material. But just in case, they also have various people who act as Facebook police. So I've heard many stories from people that said that some of these, I don't know if they're self-appointed or if OSA asks them to help out, but there are certain people who are notorious for going around and saying, "I looked at your friends list and you've got two people on there who are against Scientology and you need to get them off." So
Yeah. Yeah.
they will watch you and make sure that you're not. I mean, but you make a good point that they're not going to be able to stop the algorithms. I mean, it's insane now. I remember the other day I just I don't know if I mentioned the word Colorado in an email to somebody, and like 10 minutes later, I had ads for skiing vacations in Colorado on my
It's
Facebook.
crazy. It's just
I
crazy.
mean, it's so the surveillance, it's really disturbing. But the point is that algorithm, Scientologists must be getting recommendations to Leah's podcast, my website, and they just have to be firm and not click on it.
Yeah, exactly. But they do click on it. This is what
Right.
Aaron was telling me. He gets people, making comments and stuff like that from Scientologists. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it's a losing battle myself. I think they're always gonna find the end theta content.
Well, and in that environment, with the pandemic shutting things down and making it more difficult, and as you point out, Scientologists don't really want to advertise that they're Scientologists anyway. In all of this environment now, they've worn masks and worn gloves. Of course, we knew within the first few months that gloves were useless, but Scientologists, my personal theory is that Dave is terrified personally that
Yeah,
he's gonna catch COVID and die. But
yeah,
whatever. The point is they've kept these protocols long after other people have. And
yeah,
now they've decided, okay, we're gonna let people come in and we're gonna let them do the purif and we're gonna we want them to do student hat and all these low level things. And so they want to make a big splash about it. And so they've called it the wider bridge. So I just as a networking expert, I mean as a marketing expert, tell me what you think about this approach that they're coming with.
Well, it's they don't have any marketing people left. There's nobody left at the Int base capable of doing a marketing campaign. They got rid of all of them. You know,
Right.
uh, so it's I left. There was I think 6 people left in marketing, and they weren't the best people. This the winnowing process
Right.
had not ended up with the best people. It had ended up with the most incompetent people, and which is unfortunately the way things work in Scientology. Is that the people who are doing the work are the ones who are always in trouble, and the people that just sort of try to hide and be invisible are never in trouble. So you end up with only the people that are trying to hide and be invisible.
Yeah.
And so the 6 people that were left after I left marketing were not the best. They were not the best people. And none of them were capable of writing or executing a genuine marketing campaign. So I think that this is how I imagine it. I think that the marketing decisions are being made around a conference room table by Miscavige and whatever flunkies are still in good standing.
Right.
And I think that they just bat around ideas and come up with something, and then everybody goes, and then Miscavige goes, "Oh, that sounds good," and then everybody jumps in and says, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that's great, that's great." That's marketing, probably how marketing goes these days, and I'm sure the conversation went something like this. They say, "Well, how do we communicate to Scientologists that the orgs are like wide open now? They're wide open." And somebody says, "Oh, let's just say it's a wider bridge." And everybody goes, "Yay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful." And then they publish it. And it makes no sense.
On the one hand, it doesn't really make any sense because they're really just saying, "Hey, we know we've been overly cautious about this stuff. We should have just told you all to get vaccinated, but we never did." They never did say a word about the vaccine, and so they've just kept everything shut down longer than most other people have. They've now opened their doors and they want people to come in. That's it. That's all that's going on. There's nothing new. There's nothing wider. It's
Yeah,
just they want people to come in, and they need some kind of an announcement that makes it seem like there's. I mean, you know how Dave is. Everything has to be like the biggest thing ever. It's
yeah,
always the biggest thing ever, even when it isn't. And so this is what they came up with.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's like every event has to be the most amazing thing that has ever happened, and you can't miss it. The secret thing is going to be revealed to you. And it's
Yeah.
it's just nuts. It's just nuts.
Well, look, they needed to get the word out. They want people to come in. Um, and I guess the subtler thing that this says is, okay, we know you've been sitting at home, but you need to get your ass in here and spend money.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
And so maybe that's somewhat effective. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was talking to Mark Headley recently, and he was saying that, you're never going to convince a Scientologist straight out if your first conversation is Z News ridiculous and the e-meter doesn't work. It's just not going to have any effect. But if you instead say, look at the things that have been promised and it's not working out,
Yeah,
that might get through. And I think part of Dave's problem is he keeps promising these huge, fantastic things. And I just have to wonder if a Scientologist doesn't like spend, the last few weeks thinking wider bridge. This is it. This is the big one. And then it's like, oh, they're not wearing gloves anymore. Oh, that's it. And I just have to think there's some Scientologists out there that sort of think like that. Wait a minute, this is not. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I guess it can be really hard to break through.
yeah. It's hard to break through. I mean, I've sort of had one technique that I use with Scientologists um, to undo. It's an attempt to undo the kind of brainwashing that they have, um, because there's an essay by Hubbard called "How to Study Scientology." I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I don't think I am. Go ahead.
He says if you're reading a book or anything like that, find something you agree with, and then find another thing that you agree with, and then find another thing that you agree with. That he says that's how you study Scientology. Well, of course, that's a hypnotic technique.
Yeah.
Is agreement, 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 and it's a sales. The savvy salesman knows to get the customer agreeing. Do you agree with this? Do you agree with that? You get the customer nodding right up to the point of sale. You know.
Yeah.
So what I would ask Scientologists is there anything in Scientology that you disagree with? Anything in Scientology or Scientology that you disagree with? And if you get them started talking uh, on that subject, it's like unraveling a sweater. You just pick at that
Wow.
thread, and then
Right.
there's and then it there's more and more and more, and
What are some of the things people have told you when you ask them that?
well, generally these days they'll say, well, I agree with Scientology, but I don't agree with management. I don't agree with always being pressed for money. I don't agree with having to go to all these events. You'll find things that they disagree with, and then they'll start finding them by themselves.
Right.
And they go, oh, there was that other thing. When I was on course and I had a question for the soup, and I really wasn't happy with his answer, and I didn't agree with what he was saying, and blah 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 blah. And there's uh, they'll start unraveling the whole thing themselves after a while, and then you get a call from a week later, and they say, okay, I'm out. You know.
And I think I talked over you earlier. I want to make sure people know that you actually have a book about all this called Leaving Scientology.
Leaving Scientology, yeah.
Another excellent book by you, helping people, uh, because it is a process, right? I mean, people go through stages on their way out. Maybe initially it's some unhappiness with registrars and David Miscavige, but then, they start to see the larger problems, and it's a process.
Hmm. Yeah, I was mentioning the other day that I think my turning point came when I was at the Int base, and I was thinking about that we were all working towards a Scientology world. And I started thinking about, well, what would that look like if just everybody around you was applying Scientology. And then I thought, well, I guess it would look like the Int base. And then I went, oh no, because the Int base is a horrible place you could ever imagine. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's completely dysfunctional. Everybody abuses everybody else, and I looked at that and I thought, wait a minute, that's what a Scientology world would look like. Is this place?
That's
And
a great point.
and then I was just like, okay, I'm out of here. I got to get out. You know.
And just to point out for our listeners that Int base is a reference to the International Management Base that's 90 miles east of Los Angeles in San Jacinto, California, near Hemet. It's this 500-acre compound that in the 90s and early 2000s was the main central secretive highest level place. David Miscavige lived there, and Mark Headley and Claire Headley were there. We've heard lots of stories about this famous place, also known as Gold, because the Golden Era Productions was there making videos and all this kind of thing. But Dave has largely abandoned that place now, and he's now living in Florida, and he's at the Flag Land Base, which is a very different kind of thing. And I think he's let Int basically wither on the vine, and it's just not the central brain of Scientology that it used to be.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's been my theory for a long time that Scientology is going to eventually collapse into Clearwater and abandon everything else and sort of set up Clearwater as their last stand. You know.
I agree with you. I've been saying for years that I think they're circling the wagons there, and yes, they're putting on this show about ideal orgs around the world, but that's all it is. Ideal orgs is merely a show to convince wealthy donors that Scientology is still a going concern. And
Yeah.
so, yes, they still are opening buildings. The next set will be in places like Austin and Chicago and New Haven and Hawaii and all that. They're spending millions on all that, but really, he's concentrating things in Clearwater, Florida, at the Flag Land Base. Celebrities are selling their homes in other parts of the country and moving there. And
Yep.
I really think that Miscavige himself knows that there's going to be kind of a last stand, and it's going to be there.
Yep. Yep.
Did you spend much time at Flag at all?
A little bit. I went there a couple of times, usually marketing related. To release release some new um, materials or something like that. I went there a couple of times, but the thing is that that's one of the few places on Earth where Miscavige is still respected.
Right.
The Int base doesn't like Miscavige.
Or as Mark Headley put it, the only place where he's not hated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly.
Or at least not openly.
Openly hated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody is very subservient and very respectful of him there, and which that's okay. Um, the few times I went to Flag, I found that I was treated very respectfully because I was from Int,
Yeah.
and at that time, if I was at Int, I was treated like shit. So yeah, that's a nice change.
Well, it's interesting. Scientology is so hierarchical. I mean, there's such a pecking order
Yep.
uh, throughout the Sea Org and even among the celebrities and the public. It's interesting. They're so authoritarian.
Yeah, and at the Int base, there were echelons, and gold was at the bottom of the barrel. So if you were in gold, you were the worst of the worst. You were just shit.
I see.
And then CMO Int looked down on the exec strata, and RTC looked down on everybody. So it was very, very hierarchical and very judgmental.
Well, he's got to somehow convince everyone to get excited for this new change and to get back on lines and to keep coming to Clearwater and spend money. So I don't know. Maybe a wider bridge will help them. We'll see. But they
Yeah,
surely are hurting without someone like you there figuring out their marketing.
yeah, exactly. They have no clue about how to market anything, and Miscavige could not market his way out of a paper bag. He has
Well,
he has no clue.
but we're all better off that you're no longer there, Jefferson.
Yes, yes,
And thank you so much for helping me out on this. I'll be watching to see, this. I totally agree with you. I think Clearwater is kind of a last stand for them, and it's going to be getting more intense as things go on because I think there's more pressures with these lawsuits, and who knows, maybe the government will finally take a look.
yeah.
But anyway, thank you
I,
so much
I'm
for helping
interested
me
to
out.
see how they work out closing orcs, because it's got to be
That
done
is,
very carefully so that it does not appear that they're closing orcs. And I know they've done it here in Portland. Portland used to have three orcs: Day and Foundation, and a celebrity center. And it's only the Day org that is still left.
in that ideal org they opened about 9 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. And they have a big
Wow.
building that is utterly empty. Did I tell you I went in and talked to them?
No, when was that?
This was a couple of weeks ago.
Oh my!
Well, they had sent somehow their flyers had ended up in our mailbox, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to return them. So I went down there, marched in, put them on the counter, and said, uh, "We don't need these. Stop putting stuff into our mailbox." And I said, I'm not curious about Scientology at all.
I'm
And I
not
said, I
curious.
said, do you want to know why I'm not curious? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, I was in Scientology for 35 years. I was in the Sea Org. I'm OT4, FEBC, OEC, DSEC trained. And they were like, oh, okay. And then I told them, I said, you remember the Dianetics campaign in the 1980s, which they did? And I said, well, I did that. I was commended by LRH, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I am curious about only one thing. And I said, how you keep the lights on with no people coming in. And I
What'd they
said,
say?
uh, they just didn't say anything really. And I said, I will tell you what Int Management will not tell you. There's only two ways to get people into Scientology: books and word of mouth. Those are the only two things that work. I said, your videos that, because they have one of those reception areas where it's just video players, you know.
Right.
I said, your videos don't work, your flyers don't work, none of that works. I said, it's word of mouth and books, getting books out there. I said, if you do those two things, you can get people in. Otherwise, forget it. You're not going to get anybody in. And then I handed them, there was two people in reception. I handed them each a copy of my book, Counterfeit Dreams, and I said, here, read this. You might learn a lot.
Good for you.
And I said, people will tell you not to read this book because it was written by an SP. I said, yeah, an SP that boomed Scientology and had commendations from LRH. You know, so
Gosh,
I
I
don't
hope they
know. Maybe they'll read it.
I hope they do. That's gosh, Portland is an really important location in Scientology history because of this campaign back in 1985. There was a lawsuit,
Yep.
resulted in a $30 million judgment, and Scientology had this huge campaign. People from all over the country went there and demonstrated, and a judge blinked, and he basically uh, uh, kind of changed his mind about it or subverted the jury, whatever. Scientology won. It was a huge victory, and Portland is always in Scientology imagination this like
Yeah.
great city where Scientology won. And so when they opened their Ideal org in 2013, I think it was a big deal. This is this is the ideal org in this city that we already kind of claim as a great Scientology city,
Yeah,
and it's just been empty since then. I mean, it's just like all the other ideal orgs.
yeah, it's just
It's a great
empty.
question.
And they also camouflage the fact that they closed 2 orgs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that day of reckoning is coming, and it'll be fun to talk with you about it. So, but
Yeah.
listen, thank you so much, Jefferson. I'm so glad we got to talk about this, and we'll revisit it once we see how things go with their marketing campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, call me anytime. I'm always happy to talk.
All right, thank you very much, man.
All righty.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.
Again, again, again. To witness history, ride the storm, wait to see how reckoning